welcome again. Just so you know, this is a totally improvised talk, as we decided to do this yesterday because someone bailed and then I was asked to fill the slot. So super nice slides, white background, black font, a lot of bullet points. If you have questions at any point, please go ahead and just ask. So we have like more of a dialogue here. So what I want to talk about now is more or less the basics or the basic concept behind developing an Alexa skill. As mentioned before, a skill is the name for a voice app in the Amazon ecosystem. So we will take a look at the setup, architecture, Alexa framework itself, and then just 1 or 3 design guidelines that I recommend from my experience, especially with talking with users and that stuff. So, I presume you will get the slides afterwards, after the conference has ended. I provided several links here. If you're interested to start with developing an Alexa skill, we had a conversation yesterday, and I got the feedback that Amazon is not that good in providing documentation. At least, yes, at least with the Alexa framework, they are doing a great job. As mentioned before, they have 10,000 employees, and they are producing a lot of content. So, first of all, you will need a developer Amazon account, which is basically for free. And furthermore, they have some design. I also recommend the design guide from Google. They are more concentrated on the design aspect, but I highly recommend it. Amazon also created a Twitch channel. Then we have the Slack account, the Slack workspace. Go there. You will get a lot of help. And we have, of course, the code and the templates at GitHub. So, in terms of infrastructure, what do you need? As mentioned before, you need the Amazon developer account. It's free. I don't even think, no, you don't need a credit card, that's just the AWS account. And you need an HTTPS endpoint. I highly recommend to use one of the cloud providers, obviously. The integration from AWS with the Alexa framework is really, really good. So you save yourself a lot of troubles. I'm personally on the Google Cloud, but still, AWS makes a lot of sense if you are developing within the Amazon Alexa framework. Check the requirements. I provided the link there as well because they are quite strict about that. Therefore, you're saving yourself a lot of pain if you use the AWS because they already provide some standard there. And if you want to test your stuff, you don't even need a device. You can just download the app on your phone, the Alexa app, or within the skill framework on the website, you have a test environment. So, first thing to do when you want to develop a skill is think about the use case. Voice at the current state is not very good for, not yet, very good for really complex functionalities. So focus on one thing and do that thing really, really well. So like ideal case is some sort of single command stuff and with some multi-turn dialogues. After you thought about the use case, you have different options in the Amazon environment. You have a custom skill, which is basically, whatever floats your boat. Then you have the flash briefing. Those are triggered when the customer says, give me my daily update. And then they can use, those flash briefing skills. They're quite easy to set up. It's just an RSS feed. If you're more into devices and smart home, there is a smart home skill, so you can write your own skill for your smart home devices and control them with the Alexa. And you have video, and now you also have music, so if you're a DJ, have a band or whatsoever, then you can use this API as well. As mentioned before in the other talk, start small and scale. So really do that one thing really well and then go from there and test with the users. The top category currently are games. I think in most environments it's always games. So if you think about a use case and if you want to try something out and you also want to maybe earn some money with that, then games is the right direction to go. Yeah, we also already covered that. Basically, you need your endpoint, which is in the cloud, or Lambda function maybe. Then we have the developer portal. Maybe we can check that out together later. And then on the other side, you have the screens and that stuff where you can also provide additional visual content. Yeah, but we covered it anyway before. So interaction model. So that's for me personally, that's the new and interesting stuff, because on the back end, writing the code, there is nothing that new. You mainly have some service, which is in this case the Alexa universe, calling your skill, or it's calling your endpoint, and tells you, okay, the user wants to execute this intent, and then you just do something. So that's pretty straightforward, actually. For me personally, the interaction model is more interesting, as you have some new concept there. As mentioned before, first you need an invocation name. That's the way how your third-party skills are used. Think about something people can easily remember. That's an old example of mine. In this case, it's about intolerances with food. And yeah, so think about an invocation name, no more than 2, maximum 3 words, and something that's easily remembered. After that, you have your intents. For example, in this case, we just call it query intent. And as mentioned before, the intent is what the user wants to do. And the intent defines what happens in the backend then. And you need to provide a lot of utterances. The best is around 20 to 30, at least. And the utterances are just the different ways how your intent can be called. You also have to think about the start word at the beginning. The user could say, Alexa, ask my app, or the user can say, Alexa, start, or Alexa, tell. And based on that, the utterance structure changes. So think about those different cases and provide them all within the list in the configuration. Then we have the custom slots, or entities, as mentioned before. In the Alexa universe, they're called custom slots. Basically, if you wouldn't have such a slot, then you would need to have a lot of perturbations, because you need each utterance with each value within this slot. A slot is basically a list of words. There are some defined, some already defined, like dates and city names, countries, and so on. But you can define your own lists here. So you have the utterances, so you have the invocation name, you have the utterances, and you have the slots, which all needs to be configured. One thing you should definitely remember, your interaction model is never complete, because you can't think of all the utterances people are using. So there is, fortunately, it's possible to get a transcription of the utterances of the people, so the words that people are actually using. So when you are live, you publish your skill, and then afterwards you get the data from Amazon provided, where you see what people are actually saying, and then what intent is called. And thereby you can use that data to improve and change your interaction model. So I really, really recommend doing that, because often you see there that the user says something which is quite similar what you actually provided, but it still happens that the wrong intent is called. And therefore the user obviously gets confused and annoyed, and then you get a bad review for your skill. Then we have the responses. So basically, user says something, the Alexa universe or the Alexa cloud service decides what intent is called. You react at your endpoint with your code, and then you send a response back, and the response is then read to the user. There are two different types of responses. It's a tell or ask response. A tell simply ends the session. So user says something, play Spotify, and then you say no, and then just end the session, for example. And the other option is that you have an ask response, which keeps the session open. So it's like a back and forth between the two parties. So basically, he says, play Spotify, and then you say, okay, which artist do you want to play? Then he says, I don't know, Arctic Monkeys, and then you say no, and then quit the session again. Second, you have two types of styling, more or less, the spoken response. First is plain, then just the Alexa framework decides how to pronounce each of the written sentences or the output. And then you can change that with a speech synthesis markup language or SSML, where you can provide phonemes or whatsoever, or define how certain words needs to be spoken. You can define the pitch, you can define the volume of the speech, and a lot of stuff. You can play audio files and whatsoever. So SSML, it's quite a lot of stuff can be done with that. Highly recommend using it, as it provides a better user experience. And which is also new since 3 weeks, you can pick a voice. So the Alexa framework, Google did that already since the very start. Now you can do it with Alexa as well. You can, depending on the country or the language you are providing your skill, you can pick different voices. So for one skill, for one game we developed, which plays in the Dark Ages, we actually use a male voice because it just fits more to the whole gaming concept. So, to the responses, then some inputs for the design. So Amazon, especially Amazon, focused really hard on the coding stuff. So you will find, when you start to code, you will find a lot of material. And they just more and more started to also look at the design, how to design voice applications. And that gets very tricky because there is not a lot of material, as it is quite new, obviously. The first thing I really recommend when you provide some sort of output, listen to your prompt or your response at least several times, not necessarily 50 or 100 times, but then you realize how boring, how long, or whatever it is. So I really recommend doing that. So be short and clear. That's really the most basic principle. The problem with voice is that you can't skim it, and therefore, and furthermore, you can't actually show Alexa that you already understand what is going on. You just have to listen the whole time. And that gets really annoying really fast, so I really recommend be short and also clear. Don't be ambiguous, for example. That's the same with provide variations. That means try to listen to your response 100 times, and it always says the same line. And if people really use your skill a lot, let's say, for example, once a day, then that gets boring quite fast. That's different to graphical user interfaces. There you should always be consistent, for example, with your buttons or whatever, with the design. That's not the case with voice applications. There you should provide actual different variations of the output. And then guide the user. The tough part with voice user interfaces that you actually don't see what possibilities you have. It's like a blank page. Therefore, when the user starts your skill the very first time, you have to provide some options. Hey, you can do that. That's the thing I'm really good at. And then afterwards, he says one command, and then based on the context, you actually provide further options what can be done within this skill. So let's take a short look on how this looks like. So within the Alexa developer console, you have your different skills, which in my case are my stuff. Then you just basically create a skill. So it's pretty straightforward. The good thing is they also have since last year an API or a command line interface, so you don't need to do everything within the web interface, and you can integrate it into your, for example, Jenkins build. So when you need to update something, you can just write a short script where the commands are stated, and then you can upload it automatically. So that's quite nice. There you see the invocation name. In that case, I just called it Night's Watch, and then you have the intents. As this is a US or an English skill, you have to, so that's a requirement to implement those 5 skills. The user obviously always needs to be able to stop the skill, obviously, and then also the help intent. Interestingly, the help intent itself is not called that often, so people don't use it. Either way, implement it and make it context sensitive. So depending what you are, in what state the user currently is, what feature he is using or she is using, provide a different help. And the fallback intent, that's just for the English language right now, is basically when something goes wrong. So the user says something, you don't provide an intent for that, then the user gets to the fallback, or then Amazon Alexa decides it's okay, let's call the fallback intent, and then you can actually react on what's happening. So you can say, hey, sorry, you probably should use these options, or whatever fits to your use case. So, and then you say, okay, we make another, let's say the wake me up intent. Doesn't matter. And as mentioned before, you define a lot of set an alarm at number. And that is, for example, a slot, as mentioned before. In this case, we just have a date, or a time actually. Time. So that's basically it. So it's quite easy. You define all your utterances. That's the hard part, the tough part, to come up with all the possible ways, or all the possible utterances a user can come up with. Exactly. So, and then you have the slots. In this case, we just use the time slot. As mentioned before, we already have a lot of existing slots that include a huge list, example for the actors or for music events, movies, whatsoever. So you don't have to come up with your own list, which saves quite a lot of time. But of course, you can create your own slots, which, let's say here, and then you say custom, and then you can come up with a list. I don't know, let's say test whatsoever. Yeah, and time is running out. That would be also interesting, synonyms and that stuff. So you can fine-tune your invocation or your invocation model even more on the slot values. So for example, you say, okay, I say whatever, but user could also say, I don't care. And then you have an ID, let's say 1. So within your code, you don't have to check on a text base, but you can do it actually on an ID base, which saves you a lot of trouble, because at the very beginning you didn't have that for like 1 year, and so you have to do a lot of text matching, which gets annoying quite fast. So time is over already. Thanks.